we're going to continue to focus on standing up for our farmers, to protecting our canola producers and other agricultural industries, even as we continue to work with China for a path forward.
MPs are back in Ottawa after a 2-week break, back in their constituencies, and the opposition came out swinging against the federal government this morning over its response to Canada's canola crisis. China began banning some Canadian canola imports in early March, widely viewed as retaliation for Canada's arrest of Huawei's CFO Meng Wanzhou back in December. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says he wants the Prime Minister to immediately do 3 things: appoint an ambassador to China, increase emergency financial aid for canola farmers, and launch a formal trade complaint against China through the WTO.
This policy of appeasement that Justin Trudeau has pursued with the government in China has clearly not worked. They have escalated the situation. They've gone from detaining citizens to now putting trade barriers on one of our major exports. So clearly doing nothing has resulted in Canada's position being weakened and the situation escalating.
So why hasn't the federal government announced any additional relief for farmers, and what is it doing to heal the diplomatic rift with China? Marie-Claude Bibeau is the Minister of Agriculture, and she joins us now from the foyer of the House of Commons over in the West Block. Hi, Minister. Nice to see you again. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
So in addition to Mr. Scheer, we had Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe on the show last week, and they are both essentially calling, and this is sort of the simplest thing that they're calling for, an increase in emergency financial aid for canola farmers. Essentially, they want that advance payment program, the cap on it, increased from $400,000 to $1 million. Will you do that?
Well, I'm looking into it very carefully. Obviously, increasing that type of program, and this one specifically, is one option that I'm looking at, and it means putting more significant money on the table. So I have to do some due diligence to make sure that it is the best tool we have to support even more our farmers, because they already have access to this program up to $400,000. And with a first amount of $100,000 free of interest. So it's already accessible to our farmers. So I needed to take some time to look into it and make sure it was the right program, and to do the due diligence, because it is managed by a different association throughout the country. So I have to do it carefully.
That request from the Premier first came about a month ago when he met with the Prime Minister. So how much more time do you need to do that due diligence?
I'm about done with that, but there's already different tools, financial tools that our farmers, producers can use. And I'm on this file since the first day, and actually it came right when I was mandated as the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, and it took me 2 months like it took to Mr. Scheer to get involved in the file.
So sorry, when will the federal government make a decision on increasing the cap? I take your point that they can already access $400,000, but when will you make a decision on whether or not to increase that cap to $1 million?
Well, I have different tools in front of me, and it will be very soon.
What does very soon mean?
Very soon, it means that I would say I'm confident to have an answer before a week.
Okay, last time we spoke, exactly a month ago, you said you were trying to get a delegation to China to make the case for the food security, the issue of security and the issue of the science behind the food. Where does that request stand today?
We are still having these technical, scientific conversation through video conferences now. So our team at the CFI, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, is having this type of conversation with the Customs China officials.
Does that mean that no delegation will go to China?
Eventually, hopefully, but for the time being, we are still having the scientific conversation through video conference.
Was there a specific request made to the government in China to send a delegation in person?
Yes, I did ask for a delegation who would be led by the president of the CFIA, but for the time being, we are pursuing the video conference conversation.
What was China's response to that original request?
For the time being, video conference seems to be the approach, and we are ready to move and to go to China as soon as it is appropriate.
Does that mean that China said no at this point to sending a delegation there?
No, they didn't refuse. We're just pursuing through this type of technical communication.
So help me understand then. If they didn't say no, why wouldn't we be sending someone? And I'm asking because I'm guessing we've had a number of representatives from the canola industry on. They are very anxious to try and get some face-to-face conversations in China in order to prove that their product has no issues with it. So if you're saying that the Chinese government didn't say no to it, why wouldn't you send that delegation?
The message is not now, which is not no. And I can assure you that we are having ongoing conversations. We have a very competent and dedicated representative in China with Mr. Nicole, and we are following the conversation, yes, the issue very, very carefully. I understand it is so important for our farmers and their families. I understand that at this time of the year, it's seeding season, it's even more difficult for them. And we are really working as a team with my colleagues, Minister Freeland and Minister Carr, so we can find a solution to this.
Just to be clear, when you say the message is not now, is that the message from your government to canola farmers, or is that the message from the Chinese government to your government?
This is the situation we are in between, going through this conversation with the Chinese officials.
Sorry, that doesn't really answer. Are you saying that China said to Canada, you can't send a delegation now, but maybe in the future?
We haven't had such a clear response, but we definitely have not had any refusal of our request.
Does it concern you that you haven't had a clear response to the request? I mean, what should Canadians take from that?
As long as we continue the conversation, video conference is still a good way to communicate, and we are still asking for evidence of that irregularity, that there are some kind of pest they told us they have found. We need to see it. We need to see evidence. Because I mean, we have very high quality, the best canola in the world. We have a very robust inspection systems, and we stand by these, high quality products and inspection systems, and it's important for our reputation and our exports.
You mentioned the country's representative there, Mr. Nichols, at this point. When will the federal government appoint a new ambassador to China?
This is a decision that has to be taken very carefully. Minister Freeland and the Prime Minister are looking at it.
Has there been, I know that China needs to provide sort of approval, agrément, on the appointment. Has an appointment, a name being put forward by the federal government here?
Minister Freeland is in charge of this file, obviously with the Prime Minister.
So you don't know, you can't answer one way or the other if there is? I mean, this is affecting, obviously I'm asking in the context of this current crisis with canola, right? That's why, I mean, there are, again, Scott Moe was on, we've had other canola producers on, wondering why this isn't sort of being taken up at the highest political level possible. And I'm just wondering if there is a timeline the federal government is operating under to appoint someone at that level to represent our country there.
It is being taken care of by, the highest level, with the Prime Minister being personally involved and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We take it very, very seriously. And we work as, I want to put the emphasis on the fact that we are working as a team, not only within the government, but also with the industry, with our provincial counterparts, with the two companies that are directly involved, and with the associations representing the canola farmers. We have a working room, and we are really evaluating all the options we have in front of us to support our farmers and their families, to diversify our markets as well. So it's really, I mean, we're working together. Should
Canadians be worried that if the Canadian government can't even get a specific response to its request to send a delegation to China, that getting agrément on the appointment of an ambassador might be impossible?
I would definitely not say it's impossible, but we want to do the things in the right order at the right moment.
Is there a timeline, though? I mean, you were able to say within a week you're going to decide on whether or not to increase the amount of cash advances. Is there a timeline for appointing a new ambassador?
I cannot be so specific for this question.
Okay, and one final question for you. Norway experienced something similar in which, because of a political issue, salmon, which was primarily exported to China, was banned for a number of years. It took about 7 years for that to be resolved. Do you think that canola farmers and other pulse crop farmers in this country should be looking at a similar timeline?
Hopefully not. I mean, we are working in a way that we want to find a solution as quickly as possible with China, because it is a very important importers of canola, Canadian canola. So we really want to find a solution as soon as possible. And we are also working hard to diversify our markets and to open new markets. And the fact that we have signed a free trade agreement with Europe and with the Trans-Pacific region also opens new opportunities for our canola farmers.
Surely those markets right away will not supplant 40% of the market that farmers export to right now. That's not is that something? I mean, what's the timeline for that?
I mean, I agree with you. It takes some time, but we are already in discussions with the countries which are already importing our products to see their interest in increasing their imports and also trying to open up new markets. I will be in Japan shortly for the G20. I will have opportunities to have some of these discussions. Minister Carr is very, very much involved in this strategy to open up new markets.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Minister Bibeau. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
That's Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau from the foyer of the House of Commons. So what should the Prime Minister do? Guy Saint-Jacques served as Canada's ambassador to China from 2012 to 2016. He's now a senior fellow at the University of Alberta's China Institute and joins us from Montreal via FaceTime. Hi, Mr. Saint-Jacques. Great to see you again.
Good evening, Vashi.
Let me start with something that the Agriculture Minister told us today in her interview. She essentially confirmed that the request had been made by the federal government to send a delegation, including the head of the CFIA, to China to talk about the science behind the claims they're making around canola seed, and that there had not been a response to that. Essentially not a no, but not a yes, and that there's some sort of communication happening via video conference. What do you read into that?
Well, in my view, it just confirmed that the Chinese government does not want to meet with anyone until we promise that we will free Mrs. Meng. And of course, the situation is getting worse every day, because now it's not only a question that our canola exports are no longer welcome, but that exports of peas, of pork, of lentils, and so on, are experiencing delays on arrival in China. And I think the Chinese government wants to send a message to its importers that if they want to import commodities from Canada, they may experience delays, and as a result, people are looking elsewhere. On top of this, I know also that contracts have been delayed or canceled. And also, what is more worrisome maybe is I've learned last week that, in fact, the central government of China has asked all provinces to make a list of all the ongoing transactions with Canadian companies. And I think it's just another example that they want to build up an inventory of possible targets for future measures directed at Canada.
Can you tell me a bit more about that? How do you know that, and what could that mean?
Well, we know it's the usual playbook of China. When they are angry at a country, they will take all kinds of measures to penalize this country. And of course, it's very easy for them to request such information from companies. I've learned this from a Canadian company that has long been established in China, that has very good relations with its Chinese partners, and they were informed by one of their good contacts that this request had been received from Beijing, and that they had to produce all those lists. And so I see this as a confirmation that the crisis is worsening. I think that the policy that has been pursued by the government to try to have quiet diplomacy with China was the good one, but clearly we have hit a wall because China does not want to respond. And I think it's time for the Canadian government to announce a number of measures.
So what kinds of measures? I mean, you were on the show a few weeks ago and you were mentioning the idea of Chinese athletes and doing something in that respect. What kinds of measures specifically do you think the government could pursue that wouldn't put in jeopardy what's already at stake. And I'm speaking not only of canola, but of course of those two gentlemen, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who have been detained for a number of months now.
Yeah, well, you're right. They have been detained now for 4.5 months. That means that we are getting close to June 10th, at which point the Chinese government will have to decide whether they want to file official charges, and presumably that would be of espionage against them, or whether they would extend the interrogation phase. But so far, we have not been able to do anything for them. So in my view, because there has been a breach in the confidence and in the trust that is required as part of the conduct of normal bilateral relations, I think that the Canadian government should announce that Canada will no longer pursue a free trade agreement with China because of this trust that has disappeared. I think also that we should announce that we will try to diversify our trade. And for that reason, the additional resources that were announced in the federal budget last year that were going to be devoted to China should be transferred to other countries in Asia to take full advantage of the free trade agreements that we have negotiated under the CPTPP and with South Korea, for instance. I think also that we should go to the WTO to file an official charge against China for what they are doing to our canola export.
Will that make a difference, though? Will that make it, given China's sort of attitude towards the WTO?
Well, I think we have no alternative. The course pursued so far has led to no result. I think this would get their attention. I think we are at the stage where we have to be firm, because this is the only language that China understands. On top of that, I think it's time to recognize that we need to review our engagement strategy with China and see in which sector we will collaborate in the future. I had mentioned expelling Chinese athletes that are training for the Winter Olympics that will take place in Beijing in 2022. Of course, the government has to take into account that, of course, any measure that we will take will be looked at in Beijing, and they will want to apply reciprocity. But again, I think the course that has been pursued so far has not produced any result. We are now starting to see a very important economic impact on Canada's exports to China. And this is too bad, because last year turned out to be the best year in terms of our exports to China. We had a growth of 17%, and we exported for $27.6 billion of goods. It was mostly an increase in our commodities, but this year we will suffer a huge reduction. But if we don't take measures, I think China will just continue to put more pressure on Canada. And when you look at the amount of time that will be required to complete the extradition process in the case of Mrs. Meng, that means that we have to brace ourselves for a process that will go on possibly for years.
For a long time. Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time. But thank you so much, Mr. Saint-Jacques. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.